Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Bradley from Delta Energy and Environment. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're just setting up the IT. We had one or two IT issues at our end. We just checked the audience view. Just make sure that everyone can see the presentation. So it's just loading up at the moment. So yeah, good morning, everyone. My name, as I said, is Andy Bradley at Delta Energy Environment. I'm one of the directors of Delta. I'm joined this morning by two of my colleagues, Valentin and Robin, members of our energy storage research team. And on the line in Brussels, we have Patrick Clarence. Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very happy to discuss with you the European market monitoring in the third edition.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'm Secretary General of EES, and we are preparing together with Delta EE this market monitoring.
Thank you, Patrick. So there on the slide, you should just see photos of everyone in the presentation team this morning. We'll just try and keep the webinar fairly short today, 35 minutes, to run through the latest updates and findings from our third EMMES report that we've been developing now for well over a year in collaboration with EES. So the agenda today is, first of all, some short introductions on EES and Delta for those that don't know us. I think there are many of our members on the call today, but there are also many companies that we haven't worked with or aren't members of EES, so we'd just like to briefly introduce ourselves. And then I'll hand over to Valentin to just run through some of the headlines from our latest review of the European market. And then one of the big focuses in our EMMES 3 report is looking at the clean energy package, and there's a few slides in here summarising some headlines from that, and Patrick will lead the discussion through those. Now, all the attendees on the right-hand side, you should see a dialogue box, and you can submit questions and comments as we go through. We'll try and pick up on some of those, perhaps during the webinar, depending on time, but certainly we can respond to you afterwards. So feel free to get in touch with us and send us any comments or questions using that dialogue box. So just briefly, some short introductions. Patrick, would you like to introduce EES?
Yes, thank you very much. So I would like to share with you that EES actually is a member-based association. So we are financed and supported by industry. The members are visible on the slide. And our main role is to advocate and to lobby towards the European institutions, meaning the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. And we are pushing mainly to get the legal framework right to allow for business cases to emerge and to get support for research and development and also implementing and demonstrating these technologies. This is the work we do. You see that the members are coming from a wide range of actors. You have research centers, component suppliers, equipment suppliers, utilities, developers, you have distribution system operators and also transmission system operators. So it's regulated and non-regulated entities working together in this association. It can be sometimes a bit challenging, but at least the positions we have are supported by the whole sector.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrick, for a quick introduction. I'll do the same for those that don't know Delta. We're a research consulting company based in Edinburgh. Our focus is to help organisations develop the best strategies, business models and customer propositions for the energy transition. So we're a research and consulting company, a knowledge-based consulting company really focused all around new energy. And you can see on the screen here some of the areas that we focus on, ranging from electrification of transport through to flexibility, storage, heat, distributed power and digital energy. And indeed, a large part of our work today is really technology agnostic, looking at business models, routes to customer, type issues. Specifically around flexibility energy storage, we do a lot of focused work on these topics, demand response or behind the meter flexibility in particular, along with the analysis that we obviously do around the energy storage market in Europe. There's a lot more information about that research on our website. You can see a couple of links there and some examples of the work we do, particularly the sort of competitor landscaping work that we do for our own subscribers, which complements, I think, a lot of the market work we do under the EMMES report. In terms of who we work for a wide range of clients, energy suppliers, manufacturers. Probably about 3/4 of our work is in Europe and about a quarter is outside of Europe, and particularly in Japan, we have a very strong client base in Japan. So hopefully that gives you a very quick overview of Delta, and please feel free to visit our website for more information. So moving on to the main part of the webinar, just briefly to introduce the EMMES report for those that aren't familiar. This is something that Delta are developing in association with EASE. This is the 3rd edition, EMMES 3. It's something that we do every 6 months or so every twice a year. And really the 3 main objectives are outlined there on the slide. It's about providing a common set of data for industry stakeholders to rely on, an accepted evidence base to support the debate around energy storage, and actually to save members of EASE and our own subscribers at Delta lots of time and effort to stay ahead of what is a very dynamic market. So the report obviously is available to all the members of EASE and our own subscribers at Delta, but non-members can buy the report on a standalone basis for €4,000. And there's more details on how to do that at the end of the slide deck. So in terms of the EMMES report itself, this gives a brief overview of the contents. It has country reports on the major markets, but looks at really all of the interesting regions in Western and Central Europe. It segments the market into residential, behind the meter, C&I behind the meter, and the front of meter, and it looks at specific industry issues in each edition. And in this edition, we've focused on the clean energy package. So this is just a contents table from the EMMES 3 report. You can see it's a fairly chunky report. It seems to get bigger every edition, and I'm sure that will continue as more markets develop and become interesting for energy storage in Europe over future years. So, very brief introduction to EMMES, and hopefully that helps you understand what the report is designed to do and how to help the industry. Now I'd sort of like to move on and just share with you some of the headlines on how the market has moved over the last 6 months since our EMMES 2 report last summer. So at this point, I'll hand over to Valentin, and he will talk through the next few slides.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Andy. So I'm now going to share some of the headlines from the last EMMES 3.0 report. So the European market is continuing to grow quite strongly. So in 2018 specifically, we've seen a 75% growth in the overall market size. The residential sector itself grew by 28%. The C&I market is currently emerging across Europe and grew more than threefold. And the front of the meter sector more than doubled in 2018. Looking forward in 2019 and 2020, the market will continue to grow, but at a much smaller pace. And the front of the meter segments will be the main reason of this difference of growth from a year to another. In 2018, the overall annual market size will be exceeding 1 gigawatt hour, and the worth will be above 1 billion. In 2019, the front of the meter where most of the storage projects being installed, but we're seeing these trends changing in 2020, where most of the storage installed will come from the end-meter assets. So looking the forecast here, we can see that the growth has been much more significant in 2018. Reaching 75%, if you compare that to the growth in 2017, where it was 54%. And you can see that most of this growth is actually coming from the front of the meter assets. Looking forward, the growth will be, as we said, a bit smaller, so 12% in 2019 and 16% in 2020. So yeah, most of the reason why we're seeing this major growth in 2018 is actually coming from the UK front of the meter market that's been much more active than expected. And the main reason why we've seen this kind of surge of front of the meter project is because some project has been delayed from 2017 and we've seen some project commission earlier than we were expected from 2019. The cumulative market is expected to reach 5.5 gigawatt hour in 2020.
So thank you, Valentin. Just to perhaps dwell on that slide and a little bit, and also to allow people to voice their opinion on it, I think, the overall market forecast. It might be interesting to run a poll and get the audience's reaction to that forecast. So we have in the webinar software, we have an option to run a poll and ask people for their response. And we'll put that on the screen now and ask for people's reaction to the poll. So to the forecast, I'm sorry. So, you know, when we look at that forecast, and we had quite long debates here at Delta actually around the forecast, it seems counterintuitive in a way that the market would grow so strongly in 2018, but then the growth rate would actually weaken so significantly in 2019 and 2020. Now, clearly, a lot of the fluctuation in the market is to do with the front of the meter sector, which is perhaps less predictable and more prone to short-term tenders or policy decisions in particular markets. So, you know, we're very confident about the forecast looking forward. The growth rate in the current year will be lower than last year because certainly through a lot of our research, we heard consistently from stakeholders that the front of the meter markets are becoming quite saturated, and values in that part of the market will be weaker than they have been in the past. So we certainly expect a slowdown in the front of the meter sector, which accounts for the lower growth rate, I think, largely in 2019. But there are one or two other things going on. I mean, the German residential market remains extremely large, and I think it accounts for something like 3/4 of the European residential sector, and that market is showing signs of maturing. It's still growing, but it is maturing, and because it accounts for a large part of the growth in Europe, again, that leads to perhaps a slightly slower growth rate in 2019. So we see good reasons why the growth rate will weaken in 2019 compared to 2018. But very interested in people's reaction to that. So in terms of the poll, Robin, have we got many responses?
Yeah, we've got about 3/4 of
Okay.
attendees. Yeah,
Okay,
so
fantastic. Okay, well, if I close the poll in 5 seconds, and then perhaps we can publish the results. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, if we close the poll now, and if we can publish the results, we can see that actually. That is, for me, actually, that is a very interesting result. That most people see that our forecast is about right. I can't see that actually very clearly on my screen, if I'm honest, but the majority of people think we're about absolutely right, and it's actually quite balanced between optimistic and pessimistic. But there are some people who think that our forecast is highly optimistic. So that's a very interesting result. I had anticipated, I have to say, from that from that poll, that most people would think that actually the forecast looks pessimistic because we're projecting forward slower growth rates than we've seen over the last year or two. But actually, it's very interesting to see that the majority of people agree with that type of forecast. So that's a very, very interesting result. And how many people voted in that poll, Robin? Do we know? It's about.
It would have been about 50 people.
About 50 people. Okay. Somebody, there's just one question to take quickly. What's the reason for significant increase in residential? Well, Valentin will probably come on to that when we look forward. Yeah. But just, there's a question there about are EVs included, and we're only looking at stationary storage here. So we're not looking at battery storage in cars. It's only actually stationary storage that's included within this forecast. So it doesn't include anything to do with EVs.
Yeah, another question as well that I just would like to answer is it seems to have a confusion with the number with the 5.5 gigawatt hour, which is the cumulative installed base in Europe in opposition to the previous number that we shared on 2019 being above 1 gigawatt hour. So 1 gigawatt hour is kind of the annual installation for this specific year, where 5.5 gigawatt hour is kind of cumulative installed base in Europe.
Yes,
Just
okay,
to
that's
clarify.
an important clarification. And okay, so I mean, thank you for those that voted. It's interesting to see that a lot of people concur with our forward view, perhaps more conservative than it has been, but for reflecting the reality of the market. One final point, perhaps, before we move on to make, is that actually our forecast for 2019 is still higher than we had forecasted in EMMES 2. So actually, although the growth rates perhaps are lower than we had previously forecasted in EMMES 2, actually in EMMES 3, we're saying that the market in 2019 will be bigger than we had previously expected. So there's still a very positive momentum in this market, even though from year to year you will get these fluctuations in the market growth. So just moving on, perhaps conscious of time, to some of the slides that we prepared in terms of what to watch for over the next years. So Valentin, perhaps the next 2 or 3 slides, you could just quickly run through some of the main trends and interesting developments you can see coming in the market.
Yeah, sure. So now I'm just going to introduce what's kind of the key things that we're seeing emerging in all the different segments that we're investigating. So for the residential market specifically, so we are seeing a range of markets actually emerging. So like the Spanish market, where recent regulation changes are making us expect that the market will develop in the coming years. Also, Czech Republic, Austria, and Switzerland are quite emerging as well, thanks to governmental subsidy. The German market still accounts for the biggest market. So as we discussed previously, it's currently representing most of the European market, and we're seeing around 2020 a new growth in this market coming from PV owners that will see their feed-in tariff expiring. And the growth in the Italian market will be a bit smaller than what we expected in EMMES 2.0, mainly because we didn't see the local subsidy that were expected really materialize. So this might evolve, but currently the markets then keep growing, but at a smaller pace. Regarding the UK, the market is still kind of struggling. However, we're seeing interesting business models that are developing to take advantage of flexibility markets, and might also trigger the market in the coming years. Regarding the C&I markets, UK and Germany are still leading these segments. An interesting things and developments that happened recently is looking at the UK is the recent change in kind of the regulations and or the grid charges are being applied. That's going to remove a significant chunk of the revenue stream. So we're seeing this becoming more challenging for the UK specifically. We've seen also interesting developments and projects coming from the Netherlands and Belgium. And e-mobility is starting to be a strong driver all across Europe, where storage is actually needed to support the development of the EV charging infrastructure. So this is coming from the country that you're seeing in blue here, but also from other regions across Europe, like Eastern Europe and the Nordics. And Spain, again, with the recent regulation change, the emerging flexibility markets are currently positioned to be a much more appealing market in the coming years for the C&I segments. On the front of the meter side of things, so no surprise to see the UK and Germany here. Still a lot of projects coming from these two markets. More surprisingly and interestingly, there's the French market that's starting to have a significant activity, where the first project has been commissioned earlier this year, and we're expecting to see around 75 megawatts being installed in 2019. And Republic of Ireland is also showing good opportunity thanks to the DF3 schemes. So that's covering all the kind of key finding for these editions, and I'm not going to hand over to Patrick for the policy slide.
Oh, thank you, Valentin, for running through those slides just quite quickly. Just to pick up a couple of questions that have come in while you were speaking there. One of the attendees has asked, is it possible to get the same forecast as we showed for the overall European market per country until 2020? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. That is what you get if you get access to the EMMES report. So if you want a country by country, sector by sector breakdown, that's essentially one of the things that the EMMES report will provide in lots of detail. If you want longer term forecasts than that, then we certainly provide that in our own research at Delta for our subscribers. Very happy to talk to you about that. Another question around how much storage from second life sources in this forecast, and it's a slightly different question to the market question, obviously, but it is second life batteries are obviously something that are attracting increasing interest, I think, in the market, and we certainly see a number of developers who are developing propositions based on reusing EV batteries for stationary storage. Companies such as Eaton have had that type of proposition in the market for some time. That's part of the market that we would certainly expect to develop over time. Challenges there with customers adopting those types of product, but obviously a lot of exploration in the market needs to happen around the price points for those types of offers with customers. But certainly as part of the market that we would expect to grow within the overall market growth that we're presenting this morning. So thank you, Valentin, for running through that. I'd now like to move on to the sort of hot topic that we looked at in our EMMES 3 report, which is looking at the impact of the clean energy package on the energy storage market. And I'd very much like to hand over to Patrick at this point to lead us through the next few slides.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, the beast which we're working on since more than 2 years, and which is completely restructuring, the aim is to completely restructure the legal framework in order to adapt to the changing realities on the ground, which are obviously the Paris Agreement, but which is also the reality that you see more and more renewables coming in and more decentralized generation, and that participation of consumers is more and more active. DSOs have to play a new role probably in the future. We have the discussion just before about charging infrastructure and the battery supporting charging infrastructure, which raises all the questions of who may own these batteries if they're put into the charging infrastructure system. And a lot of clarification has been done in this clean energy package. This, on the other side, also opens new possibilities for new businesses. So it is interesting to go into the details of this clean energy package and the opportunities it offers for private and regulated companies. So in a nutshell, this clean energy package is composed of 8 different regulations or directives, which are some more, some less relevant for the energy storage business. We have highlighted the ones with a star as being more relevant. Others also touch, because if you talk about building performances or energy efficiencies, you can increase this obviously with storage and with batteries and on consumption. But the main ones are the Renewable Energy Directive, the Electricity Directive, and the Electricity Regulation. These have been provisionally agreed end of last year under the Austrian presidency, and in January there was some last clarification points, and now we have the text being definitive. It has still to be voted officially by the European Parliament and by the Council, and then it will be published in the official journal after translation into 22 languages. The challenge is the pressure is very strong on the Parliament and the Council to finalize it before or during latest next month, because then we will have European elections and we will have a new Parliament coming in, so the voting process will be finalized somewhere next month. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the situation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Wait just a second. I will just find a question.
Yeah, you go on, Patrick.
Thank you. We will have a workshop on this where we will brief everyone very clearly about what is happening, where you can ask questions, how this impacts your business, and you could register on the link which is below for the Clean Energy Package workshop, which Keith will make in Brussels on the 22nd of May. So.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Patrick. So the next 2 or 3 slides, we're just focused on the 3 of the 8 directives that have been highlighted there, as these ones are particularly significant for energy storage, but within the EMMES3 report, we look at all 8 of the clean energy package aspects. So just moving on to the electricity directive and regulation.
Yes. So first of all, for your explanation, an electricity directive needs to be transposed into national law, so there could be slight adaptations to national circumstances, while the electricity directive is directly valid for all member states without transposal. So it will be, as soon as it's voted and published in official journal, it will be applicable, while the directive will take until next year, end of 2020, before it will become operational. Yes, that's the regulatory framework. We see this is an update of existing documents, and in the previous package, which is from 2009, I think we never found the word energy storage, and in this new package you see it something like 130, 140 times coming up everywhere. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I would like to go a bit more in details about what is in this directive or the regulation. First of all, it was very important for us to get a definition of energy storage into this directive or regulation. Didn't really have so much interest, but the definition of energy storage was crucial because we didn't have one. And when you talk about energy storage, it could be either electricity in, electricity out, so pure electricity storage, or it could be electricity in and then heat out, or it could be cold out, or it could be a gas or a liquid out, fuel, whatever it could be. Then it was not clear what was contained in the definition. Now it is clear that you can, as it's an electricity directive, so it's still talking about electricity in, but then you can use it in different forms as energy carriers as output. So that's in. And this can have an impact on the question of ownership of these devices. This will have an impact on the grid costs and participation in, let's say, balancing markets and so on. We have the ownership question which has been identified. So we know that the rule is that regulated entities should not be allowed to own energy storage devices, but if they make a tendering process and there's no market player providing it, then there are exceptions where a regulated entity could also own energy storage. Details are more given in the workshop we're doing also on this one. We have the active consumer, which are empowered. You have the self-production, the participation in retail markets, and so on to be done. We also see that the barriers for new market players to access storage facilities is lowered. So the DSOs and the TSOs must, when they do their planning, consider what storage could deliver for their network. So in the past, it was a lot of struggle. We have since 4 or 5 years engaged with the Transition System Operators Association and SOE with ease in order to have a cost-benefit analysis when you develop your network, which reflects the real added value of storage in the system. It was not really so easy, also because the time resolution is hourly, and the added value, which is done by storage, is very often sub-hourly. So there were some discussions, and this is now the moment of being adapted. Then we see the fact that we will have not only a European Transition System Operators Organization, but also European Distribution System Operators. And this is showing that the role of the DSO will also change. We will see them being also procuring services, which was not the case in the past, and like flexibility, congestion, and all this, which is on a local level, and storage will be part of this. For the regulation as such, there's a lot of talk about having everyone on the same level playing field. This is good. It is also scrapping price caps, so you can now have prices which can go through the roof or really in the basement, meaning that you can have for some minutes or hours prices of several thousands or 10,000s of euros without any cap. We have the call from the legislator, but it's not very precise, that there should be no discrimination against storage and the right for storage to participate in different markets, while we have the obligation also to have all all new flexibility tools able to participate in ancillary and balancing services which the TSO are tendering out. And then finally, as I said before, we can participate in capacity remuneration mechanisms. In the Renewable Energy Directive, there is a requirement that capacity remuneration, in the regulation, there is the requirement that the capacity remuneration mechanisms must fulfill a limitation of 550 grams per CO2 per kilowatt hour of CO2 emitted, meaning that you may not have long-term contracts. There are some small exceptions, long-term contracts with coal or lignite-powered plants because they emit more per kilowatt hour. So the capacity remuneration mechanisms need to consider only technologies which emit less than 550 grams per kilowatt hour. There are discussions to reduce this even more. So we see that there will be more and more need and more demand for balancing capacity coming from CO2-free devices like storage devices.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I mean, it sounds as though there's a number of very positive things for energy storage. And in terms of perhaps the things that could go wrong between this clean energy package being sort of supported at the Commission level and what will actually be enacted at the national level, how much potential is there for the national interpretation of these directives to be slightly different than what was intended? Is there much scope at a national level, or will it just be that these directives will be adopted as published at the national level?
Yes, so the directive as such needs to be transposed, but it must keep the direction given by this directive and the idea given by this directive. But we could see something when we talk about ownership. In this directive, it is clearly mentioned that there is a process of tendering, that therefore or a project, not tendering is not mentioned, sorry, it was not precise enough, but the market should first be consulted, that you need to offer this service on the market and see if the market delivers something. And if not, then the regulated entity may be allowed to build this storage device themselves and to operate the storage devices themselves. In this directive is a mention about the fact that the device as such may not serve to buy and sell electricity on the market, which is a tricky issue because in EES we believe that we will need to have all remuneration possible, all services which can be remunerated delivered by a device to maximize the social welfare, which means that a device which is only operated and owned by a regulated entity, and therefore the device is prohibited to, let's say, make arbitrage or frequency containment reserve, then the device would be very pricey for the regulated entity. Yeah. But if we could imagine that the regulated entity would own and operate this device for, let's say, the 2 hours evening congestion from 6 to 8, but give it for the other 22 hours to market players, so they could maximize the revenue streams, and this obviously would then be deducted from the payment the TSO or DSO would receive for this device, then you could maximize the social welfare. And this tiny clarifications, may the device play on the market, or is it the regulated entity which may not play on the market, is something which could be differently in different member states because it's written in the directive, and the directive needs to be transported to national law and leave some leeway. So it's not really clear if the regulation says the device may not play on the market. If not, some member states would say, oh, but the idea is that the regulated entity is not playing on the market, so I will transpose it saying the regulated entity is not allowed to play on the market. So it's not clear, it's open. It's
okay.
Which is not.
Okay, that's really very interesting. I'm sure that will be one of the big topics of discussion at your workshop on the 22nd of May that you mentioned earlier on. So, yeah, that's a very interesting issue. So just moving on, Patrick, thank you for that. On to the just perhaps a few comments around the Renewable Energy Directive.
Yes. So the biggest driver we see that we have 32% of renewable energy in the gross final energy consumption by 2030. I mean, a lot of people do not grasp what this means. It means that in 11 years from now, we need to go to 32% for all energy consumption. Knowing that the transport is very fossil fuel driven, and also heating and cooling is very fossil fuel driven very often, we know that for electricity, there will be probably something like 55 to 57%, which will be generated by renewable energy sources. So in 11 years from now, we will have more than half of all the electricity consumed in Europe be generated from renewable sources. This is a huge impact to the system. It's a huge impact. And most systems were not designed like this. That's why the Clean Energy Package tries to prepare us for this. This means also that there will be a lot of need for flexibility in order to get a balanced system and not to build an excessive number of connections, interconnections and of lines, which would explode the cost of the electricity system. So this is one of the important decisions which have been taken. We also see the emergence of renewable energy communities, cooperatives, and we see that self-consumers is there's a right of self-consumption. Even there will be behind the meter storage may not be subject to undue charges and fees. So there was questions for some, if someone behind the meter, if you capture your own TV and you use it then at home, if you still need to contribute to charges of the system because someone needs to bear the system cost, but this has been clarified. It's also very clear that the heating and cooling needs to be increased, which has an impact on the fact that we need to have cold storage and heat storage more developed. And we see that the final consumption in the energy sector, in the transport sector of renewable energy is also increasing. So we see the push for electric vehicles, but we will also see the push for synthetic fuels and synthetic gases. So we are struggling for the moment to decarbonize air transport and larger distances and also freight. So the boats coming from China or going to the US, even if that's a big question how the trade will continue in future, is not decarbonized. It's very often heavy fuel oil or kerosene. So to use carbon-free synthetic fuels by having this sector interfaces which storage allows for, by using hydrogen as one of the carriers to get to methanol or ethanol or other fuels, is for sure pushed by this renewable energy target in the transport sector. And finally, we see that gas from renewables is pushed to come to the gas network because we cannot achieve the Paris Agreement target 2050 decarbonization strategy without decarbonizing our gas. So there's also, again, cross-sectoral interfaces, a lot of push for using renewable energy based from electricity also to transform this into gas. And this is what I mentioned before, the capacity remuneration mechanism, 550 grams, not more. So if you want to have a long-term contract, your device may not emit more than 550 grams per kilowatt hour of CO2, which is pushing for balancing, also larger capacity balancing, where we see new technologies coming in, maybe bigger flow batteries or maybe bulk liquefied air storage or compressed air storage, which will come in to allow for longer term capacity to be provided to the system.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. That's a very concise run through of what is, I think, a very important piece of legislation. In the EMMES report itself, we look in a lot more detail at these topics, and there's a whole section on assessing the impact of the clean energy package on the storage sector. So there is a lot more detail in the report itself. We thought it would be interesting now to run just a second poll in the last 5 minutes or so of the webinar to ask the audience's view regarding the clean energy package. So we've published a poll now you should see coming up on your screen. What impact do you expect the EU's clean energy for all Europeans package to have on the energy storage industry? And we're just asking, do you expect it to be really positive, somewhat positive, neutral, negative, or actually you don't know? And I think we're just sort of interested to see what the feeling in the industry is. We have many different types of company on the call today. And while I'll give you a few seconds to make your decision there, make your vote. Patrick, the questions come in regarding the way the directives will work together to support development of front of the meter storage and also behind the meter storage. Do you see the directive sort of favouring one part of the storage market over another, or is it generally supportive of both parts? It feels to me that certainly some of the things around active communities really encourage the behind the meter part of the market to develop as well. So my feeling is it will support both parts of the market, both front of the meter and behind the meter. Is that how you see it?
Andy, I do support this. The clean energy package is really preparing all parts of our energy system to the new reality. So there are provisions for behind the meter, as you said, these cooperatives or these communities, but also individual consumers may now play on the market. So you really allow this to have behind the meter empowering the consumer and the owner. And then we see that with the grid activities and the grid services, it is asking that all services come on or system services are offered, are tendered on the market. So there's no obligation in future or reduced obligation. There are some exceptions to have the system services provided in a mandatory way. So let's say frequency containment reserve in some member states is forced by every person or any generator connected to the system to give 1 or 2% of this capacity for free. So this will go away, meaning that we will have new services also coming up on the tendered by the transmission system operator. Also, discussions are encouraged regarding the next steps of this clean energy package. It's about how can we facilitate more markets in the flexibility part, how can we have congestion priced in, how can we have other structural problems priced in, and how will these markets evolve. Okay. So all this will be pushed by the clean energy package.
Okay.
But again, in our workshop, you will get more details and all questions could be asked.
Absolutely, and we've just published the poll result. I think we had about 50 or 60 people, I think, responded to the poll. Overwhelmingly positive. Some, from really positive to somewhat positive, and a few don't knows there. Certainly, I'd suggest the people who voted don't knows consider attending your workshop on the 22nd of May, Patrick. Okay, but that's a very encouraging result, because I think our assessment at Delta is similar, that actually if this is implemented as it's set out, it's going to be a positive thing for the sector from 2020 onwards. So thank you for your questions. Just to sum up the webinar, in terms of the EMMES 3 report, we've just put up here the details on how to get hold of the report. If you haven't already got access to the report through your membership of EASE or being a subscriber to Delta's own research, certainly contact us if you'd like to get hold of the report. My details are there, along with Brittany's details from EASE. Please contact either of us. There's a number of other questions that have come in that we won't have time to respond to today, but we're certainly trying to respond to people individually. If you'd like the slides from the webinar, we'd be happy to share those with you. Please contact myself at Delta. Probably use my email address on the slide on the screen at the moment, and we'd be happy to share the slides with you. Of course, feel free to contact us, either Delta or EASE, if you have any questions or comments on what we presented today. But in summary, I think the EMMES 3 report has been a really actually very interesting piece of analysis to look at how this market is evolving and how it's changing. And I think without doubt there are some exciting times ahead over the next year or so for this sector. So we hope you webinar enjoyable. And Patrick's and
I just want to say, Andy, I do completely agree with you. We are now in the phase where the sector will really change rapidly, and where the companies need to understand where it goes in order to grasp the next business models which are emerging. So that's really now is the moment where you need to follow the pulse of change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you, Patrick, for your very valuable and insightful contribution today. I'll talk with you soon, no doubt. And thank you, everyone else, for your time today. We know how busy everyone is, so hopefully you found this very useful. And please do get in touch if you have any questions or would like the slides. So good morning, everyone. Have a nice day.
Yes, good morning. Goodbye.